Hello everyone, welcome to the One Room Schoolhouse, and the topic of this video is rules for behavior. So in One Room Schoolhouses all across the country, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we're all being taught in one time, in one classroom, by one teacher. So think about that. If you had all ages of boys and girls in one room being taught at the same time, behavior could be a problem. So teachers all across the country had very strict rules that you needed to follow. And if you didn't follow them, you could get in trouble. So I've taken the liberty of writing some of these on the board for you. We're going to review some of these rules and talk about what they mean and what they meant to students back then and what they mean to us today. Now, if you're unable to read the rules, the 10 rules on the board, you might say that this writing looks a little bit different. Well, what you're looking at is cursive. So in the 1870s, teachers would write everything in cursive, and a boy or a girl who was a student in a one-room schoolhouse was expected to know how to read and to write cursive. So no regular upper and lowercase lettering that many of us use today. In the 1870s, we were using cursive. So let's take a look at some of these rules now. These rules were important because they weren't just supposed to be followed here in the classroom. They're supposed to be followed outside of the classroom. So a lot of these things were teaching you things about respect, how to treat someone else, how to make sure you're on your best behavior. Like today, I'm sure some of you have rules in your class that teach you the same thing, how to do certain things or how to not do certain things, how to not interrupt somebody. And you could probably think of all the rules you have in your classroom, and some of these might say the same thing. But let's go over a few of these. So rule number 1, obey your elders. So think about someone who's older than you. Maybe most importantly, it might be your teacher, but it also might be your mom and your dad, your aunt and your uncle, your grandparents. We have to remember that you're supposed to obey what they tell us because they are looking after us. They want the very best for us, so we must listen to what they have to say. Rule number 2, speak only when spoken to. Now, that has to do with being quiet. Think about today in class. If the teacher's talking to the entire class and the teacher asks a question, I'm sure many of you, if you knew the answer, you're supposed to raise your hand and wait for the teacher to call on you, and then you could talk. Back then, you were only supposed to talk when someone was speaking directly to you. So if your teacher calls on you to answer the question, go ahead and speak. But until then, you had to be quiet. Shh. Rule number 3. Idleness is sinful. Now, idleness is probably a word you may not have seen before, but to be idle is to waste time. So think about, and I'm sure many of you do it today. I did it when I was a student. You might be bored in class one day, or you might be thinking about something else and not paying attention. You might be daydreaming out the window. Well, in the 1870s, being idle could get you in trouble. Rule number 4, busy hands make a quiet mouth. So think about what that means. I'm sure you can figure it out. If your hands are busy, what's the one thing that you're not doing? Rule number 5, an important rule. Cleanliness is next to godliness. So they wanted to make sure everyone was clean, that you weren't dirty. A lot of these students lived on a farm in the 1870s that went to a schoolhouse just like this. So they were working in fields, they were working with animals. If you've ever worked on a farm, it's hard work, but you can also get really, really dirty. So what they're trying to tell you is you want to make sure you stay clean. Keep your hands clean, keep your face clean, all those different types of things to keep you clean and to make sure that you don't spread germs or you don't track mud through the entire schoolhouse or your house at home. So they want to make sure you are clean. Rule number 6, stand your body tall to recite. So that was thinking about when they were reading, you had to make sure you had perfect posture. They thought standing up straight was good for you. Rule number 7, hold your tongue when others speak. Now this is one of my favorite rules because we're going to talk about what happens when you break a rule. Well, if you break rule number 7, it's pretty simple. Hold your tongue when others speak. Your teacher might just make you stick your tongue out and hold it with your fingers like this. So it's I'm trying to talk and I'm holding my tongue like this. You can't understand me, so I'm supposed to be quiet. So that was one way you could be punished. Imagine having to hold your tongue out and not say a word. That was one way they would punish you. Rule number 8, honor your father and mother. So this rule kind of is related to rule number 1 that we talked about, obey your elders. Honor your father and mother. They're just talking about someone who's your elder, who's a specific elder, your father and mother, your parents. So think about today, what your mom or your dad are today. It might be grandparents or an older brother and sister or an aunt or uncle, whoever's taking care of you. So you must remember the things that they do and respect them, honor them, because they're helping you out get through your life. Rule number 9, give thanks for life's blessings. So students that went to this schoolhouse had lots of things. They had a desk to sit in, they had a school to go to, they had books to read, lessons to learn. Other parts of the world didn't have those things. So what they wanted to do is make sure that you are mindful of that and you are thankful, because people in the United States or in other parts of the world, different continents, some boys and girls don't even have schoolhouses to go to, so they wouldn't get an education. So they wanted you to be mindful of that and be thankful. And our last rule, children should be seen and not heard. Now, you may have noticed as we've gone through these rules, there's a few of them that deal with students being respectful and being quiet and not interrupting. So they might look different, they might be different rules, like speak only when spoken to, hold your tongue when others speak. Children should be seen and not heard. So those all had to do with being quiet and being respectful. Because if you weren't quiet, if you weren't respectful, if you weren't paying attention and doing what you were supposed to in a one-room schoolhouse like this, there were lots of students in this room and you could be a distraction. And being a distraction meant you could get in trouble. So they wanted to make sure that you followed these rules properly and to the best of your ability. And for many students, they did. But for others, they didn't. So what would happen if you broke the rules? We talked about one already. Let's talk about one particular reason. One thing that a teacher would do is if you broke a rule, what would happen? Okay, so if you didn't follow one of those rules that we talked about, you got in trouble, just like you would get in trouble today. And there were many things that a teacher could do in the 1870s to punish a student. One thing was labor. So there wasn't a janitor in a schoolhouse back then. There wasn't someone who took care of anything and cleaned everything up, except for the teacher. So if you got in trouble one day, you could be made to stay after school and you would have to clean the floors, or you would clean off the chalkboards, or you would do anything that your teacher needed you to do. And you didn't want to get in trouble and be kept after school, because the thing is, you were going to school with many of your brothers and sisters, and think about it. If you had a brother and sister who got in trouble and had to stay home or stay at school and clean, and you get to go home, do you think you're going to tell your mom and dad? If that was you who had to stay after, do you think your brothers and sisters are going to tell your parents? Do you think you're going to get in trouble when you get home? Absolutely. So they would make you clean. They might make you come early during the winter and you have to build a fire inside the stove to keep the room warm. But one thing that they could do was embarrass you. So think about, have you ever been embarrassed? Did you ever get yelled at and people looked at you and maybe laughed, or you felt bad because you got yelled at maybe in front of a bunch of people? You were embarrassed. So one thing that students or teachers would do to punish students would be embarrass them, and that's where this comes in. So this is a dunce cap. So we are in the front of the classroom. So if you got in trouble and the teacher was really upset with you, you had to come up here and wear a dunce cap. So you'd move from your desk, you'd come up to the front of the class, and you would sit here on this stool. And you can see here this has dunce on it, and it's called a dunce cap because you would have to wear it. So my head's a little big for this. This is for a student, a boy or a girl, and you'd have to wear this. So think about how goofy you look. Think about how goofy I look. So you would be embarrassed, and you might have to wear this, and you might feel really ashamed, and you might feel really, really dumb. But this was one way that teachers thought you could learn your lesson. So wearing this dunce cap was one way that you would learn your lesson. So hopefully you wouldn't get in trouble and you never have to wear the dunce cap. And the easy way to do that was by obeying your teacher and following your rules. So that kind of wraps up the idea of the rules of behavior for our classroom. So hopefully you've learned a lot. Hopefully you're following the rules in your class. And hopefully you won't ever have to wear a dunce cap. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.